Hello there and welcome to World News Program coming to you live on All 24 News. I'm your host, Screen for Zachary, and up next are the headlines. The Zionist occupation storms the Shifa medical complex in Gaza, committing a massacre and besieging hundreds. The director of police operations is murdered. The Palestinian Ministry of Health calls for international condemnation supported by factions, and the World Health Organization expresses grave concern over the assault. Also coming up, 81 Palestinians were martyred in 8 new Zionist massacres within just 24 hours, with an additional 9 killed in an occupation bombing of a house in the Nusayrat camp in the Gaza Strip. Also ahead, the United Nations verifies that half of Gaza's population faces catastrophic hunger. Guterres urges global action to prevent the unthinkable, and the EU confirms Zionist occupation's use of starvation as a war technique, labeling it as the largest open cemetery for humans. And Putin secures 5th term in the presidential elections. President Abdulmajid Tebboune extends congratulations. Russians are optimistic. And in Russia-Ukraine file, Putin warns of potential world war if Western forces enter Ukraine. Stay tuned, we've got all the details right after the break. Hello again and welcome to the program. First off in our news, Zionist forces attacked Gaza City's Shifa medical complex early on Monday, resulting in a tragic massacre of displaced individuals. Tanks, bulldozers, and relentless bombings targeted the hospital, home to around 30,000 civilians. Here's Zahra Farjani with the report.
From bombing civilian homes in the Gaza Strip, the Zionist occupation moved its pre-dawn assaults to hospitals where thousands of displaced are sheltering. In fact, during the early hours of Monday, using dozens of tanks, bulldozers, and heavy gunfire, the occupation forces launched a military attack on a Shifa medical complex in central Gaza. The attack included drone bombardment that directly targeted all hospital departments, resulting in a number of deaths and injuries.
From the vicinity of the Shifa medical complex, the Israeli raids have not stopped until this moment. There is also continuous shooting by Zionist aircraft and by occupation snipers. There are also special forces that have occupied the buildings surrounding a Shifa hospital.
Running for their lives, Palestinians hurried southwards, escaping the occupation's troops' raid on the largest medical complex in Gaza.
My Lord, I swear I'm scared. I swear I don't have the desire. I want to go.
We looked from the balcony window and we saw tanks and bulldozers. They were bulldozing the street. In the morning, they threw a bomb at the door. They broke the door. They came to us and took my uncles.
The occupation's crimes know no boundaries. Even a health institution protected under international humanitarian law wasn't spared. This adds to the long list of the most horrific violations of human conventions known in modern history.
And in this context, Brigadier General Faiq al-Mabhouh, Gaza Strip's Director of Police Operations, was killed during the Zionist occupation forces raid on al-Shifa medical complex early on Monday. Palestinian forces disclosed that al-Mabhouh, also heading the crisis cell of the Interior Ministry in Gaza, heroically resisted surrender and fought back with his police weapon until he was martyred. The Palestinian Ministry of Health is urging the international community to condemn the Zionist occupation's targeting of a Shifa medical complex and other hospitals in Gaza, describing the assault on a Shifa as a deliberate attempt to dismantle the health infrastructure in northern Gaza. The ministry holds the occupation forces responsible for the safety of medical personnel, patients, and displaced individuals within the complex, stressing that these actions violate international humanitarian law and the Fourth Geneva Convention. The ministry calls for urgent intervention to safeguard civilians and medical facilities from further damage. The government media office in Gaza has denounced the raid on the Shifa complex as a war crime, highlighting the occupation's intent to dismantle the health sector. Strongly condemning the Zionist incursion into the complex, the office holds the occupation, the American administration, and the international community accountable for the safety of those inside. The Palestinian resistance sees the occupation's attack on a Shifa medical complex as a sign of desperation, rejecting any claim of victory for Netanyahu's forces. Palestinian factions strongly condemn the ongoing hospital targeting by the Zionist occupation, citing it as part of a campaign against Palestinians in violation of international law. They assert hospitals adhere to humanitarian law despite occupation narratives. In related context, the World Health Organization voiced its apprehension on Monday following the incursion of Zionist occupation forces into the Shifa medical complex in Gaza. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus issued a warning on the X platform, expressing concern that the assault exposes health workers, patients, and civilians alike to imminent danger.
We're terribly worried about the situation at Al-Shifa Hospital in northern Gaza, which is endangering health workers, patients, and civilians.
In the past 24 hours, Zionist occupation forces have committed 8 new massacres in Gaza, leading to the deaths of 81 Palestinians and injuring 116 others. The toll from the ongoing aggression, now spanning 164 days, stands at 31,726 martyrs and 73,792 wounded, as reported by the government media office in Gaza on Monday. Furthermore, thousands remain trapped under rubble, with rescue efforts hampered by severe limitations. Several Palestinians were killed and others sustained injuries early Monday when the occupation bombed a house in the Nusayrat camp located in the central Gaza Strip. According to the Palestinian news agency, which referenced medical sources, 9 Palestinians were killed and several others were injured as a result of the occupation warplanes targeting a residence in the Nusayrat camp. The United Nations has confirmed that half of the Gaza Strip's population is facing catastrophic hunger, highlighting the pressing need for a ceasefire to prevent famine. A report by the World Food Programme warns that famine could hit northern Gaza by May, affecting around 70% of the population in the coming weeks.
So by all indications, famine is imminent in north of Gaza, where there are 300,000 people. But this is not to say that we cannot avert this situation. But in order to do that, we must act, and we must act now. We need full access, we need large quantities of food, and we need the ability to reach people where they are and provide them with this food as soon as possible. If we can do this, our hope is we can still avert a full-fledged famine. But the window is shutting, and it is shutting very, very fast.
To another report now, UNRWA confirms that 28% of children under 2 in Khan Yunis and central Gaza suffer from acute malnutrition. This alarming situation continues as the Zionist occupation blocks aid delivery to northern Gaza, despite the International Court of Justice ruling on the threat of genocide. Here's Usama Ayadi with the story.
In Gaza, 28% of children under the age of 2 in Khan Yunis and the central Gaza Strip are suffering from acute malnutrition due to the ongoing Zionist genocidal war and the lack of food and medicine, according to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East and many other international human rights organizations.
We're seeing numbers of children, 1 in 2, 1 in 3 children severely malnourished. It's worse in the north because we've had much more limited access to the north, but it's concerning everywhere. And I think to imagine children, starving to death, and we do know that some children now have starved to death.
In a statement, UNRWA said that at least 23 children have died due to malnutrition and dehydration in recent weeks in the northern Gaza Strip, especially since more than 10% of the children under the age of 2 suffer from severe emaciation in those areas due to starvation, thirst, and the lack of basic life necessities.
I'm sure you've seen this before this fighting started. They were getting 500 trucks in a day. Many of those were commercial trucks. Now, we're lucky if we get 100, 150 trucks. Lucky if we get that many trucks in. So we're nowhere near where we need to be. That's proven by the fact that children are on the verge of starvation in so many of these places. We know it. We've got to get more food in.
The agency pointed out that the first half of March witnessed the crossing of around 165 aid trucks daily into the Strip, stressing that this number remains far below the operational capacity of both border crossings or the stated target, which is 500 trucks per day.
Look, the only adequate response to the drastic, catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza is access by land. This cannot be replaced, given the current levels of need, by airdrops or by sea, because our understanding is, we're not involved in this operation, but our understanding is that delivery through the sea still needs to be finalized and operationalized fully.
The Zionist authorities have only facilitated the entry of 25% of the scheduled aid into the northern Gaza Strip so far, in addition to the failing of several airdrops of humanitarian aid conducted by the US, Jordan, and Egypt. This highlights the sharply severe situation that compounds the plague Palestinians endure to survive amid the continuous and relentless bombing, reaping their souls daily.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls for global action to address the dire situation in Gaza, terming it unthinkable, unacceptable, or justifiable. He highlights the report on food insecurity as critical evidence of Palestinian suffering and emphasizes the urgent need for intervention to prevent famine in northern Gaza.
The latest report on food insecurity in Gaza is an appalling indictment of conditions on the ground for civilians. The world's leading experts on food insecurity clearly document that famine in the northern part of Gaza is imminent. I call on the Israeli authorities to ensure complete and unfettered access for humanitarian goods throughout Gaza and for the international community to fully support our humanitarian efforts. We must act now to prevent the unthinkable, the unacceptable, and the unjustifiable.
Still with international reactions, Algeria this time called on Security Council members to act on Zionist nuclear threats against civilians in Gaza. Ammar bin Jamaa, Algeria's UN representative, made the plea during a Security Council session on disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Bin Jamaa stressed the need for nuclear-armed states to fulfill their treaty obligations.
The condemnation voiced by the participating members of the conference, denouncing Israel's nuclear threats, particularly threatening to use nuclear weapons on civilians in Gaza, must be translated into meaningful action. In closing, Algeria calls for a legally binding instrument on negative security assurances for all non-nuclear weapon states and for the negotiation of a treaty banning the production of fissile material including the stocks.
EU foreign policy official Josep Borrell condemns the Zionist occupation's use of starvation as a war tactic in Gaza, stating it's causing severe famine. Speaking at a Brussels conference on humanitarian aid to Gaza, Borrell decries the tragic transformation of Gaza into the world's largest open cemetery, where tens of thousands are suffering.
In Gaza, we are no longer on the brink of famine. We are in a state of famine, affecting thousands of people. Chancellor Scholz told Prime Minister Netanyahu, "We cannot stand by and watch Palestinians starve." Okay, then what are we going to do? We cannot stand by and watch Palestinians starve. What are we going to do? Because this famine is not a natural disaster. It's not a flood, it's not an earthquake. It's entirely man-made. By whom? Let's dare to say it. By whom? By the one that prevents humanitarian support entering into Gaza. By the lack of access. By the acute insecurity inside Gaza. Insecurity in itself prevents distribution of support, of help, but the problem is that hundreds of trucks are waiting in the border, and the ones who control the border prevent them from coming into. I'm coming from Washington, and I dare to say, well, yes, Israel is provoking famine.
The Middle East, the situation in Gaza. Gaza was before the war the greatest open-air prison. Today is the greatest open-air graveyard. A graveyard for tens of thousands of people, and also a graveyard for many of the most important principles of humanitarian law.
In Gaza, Palestinians wait in long lines, struggling to obtain some food for Ramadan amidst occupation-induced starvation. Despite these hardships, there are moments of solidarity and cooperation as Palestinians confront the occupation starvation policies together. Here's Salman Asib.
In this extraordinary Ramadan in Gaza, devoid of decorations and electricity, the scarcity of food looms large. In Rafah, displaced Palestinians gather for iftar, the fast-breaking meal provided by volunteers amidst dire conditions worsened by over 5 months of genocidal conflict and occupation siege. Outside distribution centers in the southern Gaza Strip, lines extend as men, women and children await their chance to secure sustenance for iftar, clutching pots and containers in hopes of relief. We have no choice but to come to the charity. We come from Gaza City. We have no money and we live in tents. The charity provides us with food. Without it, we would have nothing to eat and we would not be able to break fast. I come here every day to receive a cooked meal. In this charitable organization in Rafah, joy illuminates the faces of Palestinian children as they scoop bean soup into their pots, contrasting with the disappointment etched on those who leave empty-handed after hours of fasting.
We're trying to provide free meals every day to our displaced brothers. We can say that the charity now provides the main meal to most of the displaced people in the southern Gaza Strip, as not everyone is able to afford basic necessities, especially since that food prices have increased and not everyone is able to afford them.
The war imposed by the Zionist entity has cast Ramadan in a sober light, transforming one's lively gatherings into scenes of misery amidst destruction and deserted streets. Starvation looms large, prompting queues to form days ahead outside the few operational bakeries, with increasing numbers turning to humanitarian aid centers and UNRWA warehouses. Yet, these resources struggle to meet the fasting community's needs.
In other news, President Abdelmajid Tebboune highlights the importance of strengthening the internal front amidst regional tensions threatening peace and security. He stresses collective efforts to unify and fortify the nation, especially on the 62nd anniversary of Victory Day in Algeria. Abdelmajid Tebboune prioritizes strategic national objectives and calls for a connected response to current challenges, reaffirming his commitment to advancing Algeria in line with November's historic message for sovereignty and independence.
Amidst regional and global challenges, our immortal anniversary calls for heightened unity and fortification of our internal front. Prioritizing strategic national objectives, we must collectively assume responsibility to uphold the stability enjoyed by Algerians amidst regional tensions. As we commemorate Victory Day, we pledge to honor the sacrifices of martyrs by advancing towards the aspirations outlined in the November message. This entails bolstering national sovereignty, enhancing economic efficiency, and preserving the social fabric of our state to ensure dignified livelihoods for all citizens in the new Algeria.
In other news, the Russian Central Election Commission has announced Vladimir Putin as the winner of the presidential elections with 89.1% of votes in the capital. These results, including remote electronic voting, were revealed after Sunday's vote counting, with a record high turnout of 77.44% over 87.1 million citizens. And on the occasion, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune extended his congratulations to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the occasion of his re-election as President of Russia. The message was conveyed through a statement issued by the Algerian presidency on Monday. All 24 news channels' envoy in Moscow has relayed Russian citizens' reactions to the presidential election results, highlighting their optimism about Vladimir Putin's re-election. Many praised the integrity of the election and expressed confidence in Putin's leadership, considering him the right leader for Russia amid current regional and international challenges. Russian President Vladimir Putin warns of the risk of World War III if Western forces enter Ukraine. He stresses the ongoing advancement of Russian forces and the need to fulfill objectives in the military operation. Sofian Kinturi reports.
Following his decisive re-election for another term, Russian President Vladimir Putin made a brief appearance at an open-air concert on Red Square. Seizing the opportunity of his inaugural appearance, President Putin wasted no time in rejecting recent remarks made by French President Emmanuel Macron regarding France's readiness to counter any potential escalation by Russia in Ukraine.
I would like France not to play this role, which only leads to the escalation and deepening of the conflict, provoking it, but instead, as it has been said before, did something to find ways for peaceful solutions. In this sense, France can play its part, and not everything has been said yet.
The Russian president's scoldings extended beyond France to Western nations, warning that any direct conflict between Moscow and NATO could lead the world into the Third World War.
I believe that everything is possible in the modern world, but I have already said this, and it is clear to everyone that this conflict between Russia and NATO will be only one step away from a full-scale Third World War.
Addressing the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, President Putin emphasized the enduring importance in Russia's strategic agenda. He highlighted the steady advancement of the Russian armed forces within Ukrainian territory, reaffirming Moscow's dominance on the battlefield with each passing day.
If they want things that way, it generally suits us, because the Ukrainians are uselessly attacking us. In general, our Russian armed forces are advancing in Ukraine every day, taking the initiative on the battlefield. We're advancing gradually, very accurately, every day.
In the fading light of Red Square, Putin's message resonated. Russia stands resolute amid global uncertainties. As the crowd dispersed, the world contemplated the ramification of his words, marking a crucial moment in international relations.
Let's turn to more stories making headlines around the globe with Islam Said this time.
Water scarcity protests in Morocco stemming from Fikik in the east have spread. These 4-month-long protests erupt due to soaring water bills following the region's inclusion in the Eastern Distribution Group. Simultaneously, justice sector protests are gearing up to resume next Wednesday, demanding ministerial obligations be met. Amidst government neglect, March and April will see nationwide strikes and protests targeting court and ministry sites. In northwest Nigeria's Kaduna state, more than 100 people have been kidnapped in two separate attacks. The incidents follow the abduction of over 200 students earlier in March. Reports indicate that the attackers seized 87 individuals from Kajur station overnight on Sunday, while an additional 16 people were abducted in a nearby village on Saturday. Heavy rains in southern Peru's Alca town caused destructive mudslides, flooding streets, homes, schools, and a hospital. 75 houses were destroyed and roads were washed out. Despite rescue teams' mobilization, access to affected areas remains challenging due to blocked roads and ongoing rainfall, complicating relief operations. The United States and Japan have jointly proposed a UN Security Council resolution calling for adherence to a treaty banning nuclear weapons in space. The resolution aims to address concerns, particularly regarding suspicions about Russia's alleged development of a space-based anti-satellite nuclear weapon. Russia has denied these allegations and reiterated its commitment to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which prohibits the deployment of nuclear or other mass destruction weapons in Earth's orbit.
Well, we reached the end of our news. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, have a good one.